welcome back to another episode of Master Your Life with McKay. I am so glad you are here today. And I'm particularly excited about interviewing Mary Elizabeth McCue. Welcome, Mary Elizabeth.
Thank you.
I'm thrilled to have Mary Elizabeth. I'm going to read her bio and then we're going to get right on into it. But just a little bit of a personal story in regards to Mary Elizabeth and we actually met in a spiritual direction program that we were both in together. And I was so enthralled by Mary Elizabeth's story. And this has been years past. And finally, she said yes, that she was ready to come on the podcast. So I am looking forward to sharing her, beautiful, magnificent, tragic, and redemptive story with all of you. So Mary Elizabeth is a mystic. She is a Harvard-educated hospital chaplain when she suddenly had a brain aneurysm so severe that she died. After being resuscitated, she was neither speaking nor walking, and her career, her marriage, and her financial well-being all crashed around her. In this interview, we're going to talk about what she's learned through this loss and through this rebirth, and also share a little bit more about the work that she's doing in her ministry in life and how she's here to bring light to dark places, even death. Again, thank you so much for being here, Mary Elizabeth. I'm so thrilled to have you.
Thank you.
So let's get to it. So Harvard, you were a ballet dancer, married, and then a tragedy struck. And if you don't mind, just take us back. What happened, Mary Elizabeth?
What happened was, all I remember is that I had the worst headache of my life. And then I don't remember anything for months. And people say, you're lucky. Just put it that way. You don't want to remember. I went into a coma. I know that. And I died and was resuscitated. And I do remember trying to say something and everybody staring back at me because I had aphasia, which means I wasn't saying my brain was saying, I need a cup of water, but what was coming out made no sense. And I was looking at my husband like, why won't you help me? Which was really odd for him. So I wasn't speaking or walking or able to do anything.
Like not tie your shoes, not any of it, none of it. So your whole life wiped clean from square one. So do you remember dying? Do you remember the experience of the death?
No, and that's the only thing I always say. I have this closeness with God. I have this quote that I like to give about Brother Lawrence. He's someone who lived in the 1600s in Paris. And he said at one point, I have abandoned all particular forms of devotion and prayer. My only practice is I carry on a habitual, silent, and secret conversation with God that fills me with absolute joy. So that's pretty much how I feel about things. But I always feel like, how could God have allowed me, of all people, not to have had some dramatic near death or death experience? I've got no memory. I'm like, as soon as I have a real death and have conversation with God, I'm going to be like, how could you have done that to me?
Right.
It's a great book.
Exactly. It would have been a great story. I got interviewed on podcasts, and because you hear that there are really powerful stories. And one young person that I interviewed, he was 12 when he had an aneurysm, and he felt this incredible headache, like super intense, just like you were saying. And then all of a sudden he was free and there was no depression, no anxiety, everything went away. And it was just so exquisite and beautiful. And then boom, he got hit on the head and was back in the body. Right. But you know what? He had to make a conscious choice, at that point in time. But the freedom, the way he described it, and I don't think anyone ever asked him that question because I think he was so young, and I think people were afraid to talk about that. But you're not afraid of the conversation around death And I want us to dig into that a little bit, because this is a part that you and I actually share, particularly after losing my son. That really shifted profoundly. I used to be petrified of death. I was even petrified of stillness. Being a person with ADHD and lots of trauma, that movement was life to me. And stillness, physical stillness, was death. And that all got washed away with the tragic loss of my son, who was a person of very deep faith and spiritual faith. And so for me to be able to lean on his faith was the best gift that his life provided me after his death. Yes. And so how do you see death? And why are you a person that's deeply committed to being with people through the end of their life?
First of all, my father's death was so mystical to me that I've never been the same since then. It used to be that my ultimate dread was that one day my father was going to die. And yet being there, I didn't expect anything. We knew he was going to die. He'd had Alzheimer's for 5 years, and I'd been with him a lot during all that time.
You were very close to your father, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
We knew he was dying, and it was finally coming to that point. So I was just watching his face. I certainly wasn't expecting anything. And then all of a sudden, he just lit up. He wasn't communicative anymore. He was long past that. But he just lit up like he saw somebody he knew, like his mother or father or something, who had passed decades before. And when he died, the air in the room completely changed. Everything in the room changed to absolute joy, is the best way I can describe it. And I feel that that was a tiny, tiny fraction of what he was feeling as he died.
Wow. I have goosebumps even thinking about that. So can you describe what you saw, what you experienced in witnessing and being able to be there as a witness?
I just felt I could feel that incredible joy that was like a tiny flint off of what he was experiencing as he passed. And so I thought that moment of death is ineffably joyful for people. And then I started studying what some of the real incredible mystics say about that moment of death. It's incredible. I mean, there are all sorts of mystics, and some people say every person is a mystic to some degree, but these are the big heavy hitter mystics,
Right, exactly. Like Merton, we studied a fair amount of them, but for you were fascinated by the mystics. And it takes a certain person to be able to read them. And I think, unfortunately, in our religious education, we don't give as much credence to them. I was brought up Catholic. Were you as well?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, so Catholic. Yes, that's right. We were both Catholics. But I think that my mother and father loved the Jesuits, and the Jesuits were very educated, and they were, a little bit renegades, but they tend to be more engulfed in the mystics. Certainly these names were familiar to me. And so what have you learned, or what do you know through your spiritual understanding, and even especially your upbringing, about what is spirituality? Who is God?
Thomas Keating was a great monk who talked about God, and he and a lot of people talk about we in our day-to-day lives become what is our ego life, becomes sort of a false self. And we get by living our false self lives. But as we get closer to death, our real self becomes closer and closer and higher and higher. And that as we die, it's not really our true selves that die. It's our false selves that fall away, and our true selves pass right back to God.
Mm. And so you have unequivocal faith. You're like, you are a person that I know, and I don't have to talk about you or to even to be in your presence. But if I think about you, I see the light in you. And part of it is that I know the stories that you've lived through and your commitment to the light. For the people that don't have that level of faith, and I would say to you, the majority of people, what do you want them to know?
About dying or about?
About how we move into a deeper sense of faith and knowing. Is there something that you would suggest that people do or read or lean into to have a deeper sense of their own spiritual faith or understanding?
Only that they take silent time, meditative time, because that false self, or some call it our shadow lives, our shadow selves, is so busy that we think that's our real selves, and it's running 18 hours a day, that's all we know, and we really think that's who all we are. But if we take the time to breathe deeply and just meditate, or centering prayer is good. Centering prayer is a form of meditation. We can start to feel that there's more to us than that.
On the other side of fear is pretty magnificent.
Are you looking to learn more about high performance coaching with Kate McCue? Please go to the website at kate-mckay.com to learn more.
So when you had your brain aneurysm and you had lost all function, you lost months of your life. Who were you before? And then who were you after? What parts of you died and what parts were reborn, Mary Elizabeth?
I was spiritual before. What has come to light is that I was thinking, to be honest, well, now post aneurysm, I'm less than. I'm not as pulled together. My IQ is probably not as high. I am this, I'm that, I'm a lesser version of myself. It's good that I survived, and it's taken a long time for me to look at the fact that we are not just intelligence. We are not just how much money we have, irrespective of whether we've had an aneurysm or not. You know, I was writing recently about, I just turned 65, and I wrote this thing about how we are, whether you believe in God or not, if you believe in God, I think God created us so fully that who we love, how we dress, how we laugh, all those things are a part of how God created us. That's how unique God wanted us to be. And we are so many different facets, 100 different facets. And if we judge ourselves just on this or that, you know, how intelligent am I? How much money do I have? You're robbing yourself, and you're even robbing God of who you were created to be. I'm not taking an IQ test, truthfully, but even if it is lower, who gives a crap? You know?
It's a big deal. And you're a very intelligent person with, you know, before your aneurysms, you were known, your family, it was nurtured intelligence, you know, artistic creation, intelligence, all of those things was how you had your value.
Right.
Even though you were spiritual, right? And so on the other side of that was, who am I now?
Right.
Who
Who
am
am I now? not saying I am less than, and that's the story. That's the end of the story.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of people park, Mary Elizabeth.
Right.
A lot of people park in there. I am less than, and then their life is over. So how did you get the gumption and the courage to move beyond that? What was that for you?
That was just like everybody else, reading things and talking to people and slowly but surely saying, wait a minute, this is very two-dimensional.
Wow.
It takes a good coach. It honestly, it does. It takes a good coach, and it takes some really good reading and research.
So did you feel as though you were a different person? Because people often say that, like, wow, I mean, obviously you're the same person, but are there parts of you that you left behind?
No, they warned us and my husband that I could really have personality change.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that. I think a lot of the changes in me are just getting older.
Yes. Yep.
And some changes. My processing speed, I'm slower. Oh, that's another big change. Doing a doctorate now. And before I started, someone said, I sat down with someone who said, you know, this is at this time in your life, this should be, you're going to meet really interesting people and get everything you can out of your classes and just learn what you can. Those days of, you know, being hyper focused on getting an A and, you know, getting a 3.8 average and all that stuff. You've done that in the past. This is not, you know, you have your past and that'll sit there and that's fine, but that's not where you are now anymore. And you can go back to school and do a doctorate. It will be of great value doing it exactly where you are now. And I've told that to people who do not have any particular problem, and it has helped them tremendously. Other people in my program, other people who are students, and they've said, God, you know, what a great way to learn.
Exactly. And it's the new model, in all honesty, because I've been doing a lot more. There's been a big shift in the way we lead. And I think that what I've noticed, particularly even with the younger generation, is that we want to connect. We want to be connected. And as a leader, I view my role as a facilitator. I am here to facilitate people having open conversations with me and with the people in the group. And I think that's why I love doing my podcast, and I love to facilitate groups, because people don't want to be spoken at. They want to share experience. That's ultimately the goal. So I say amen to that you've been encouraged, and you're also encouraging other people to understand that what they've done is fantastic. And now let's just open up the conversation to what's real and what's around us, and where we can share and add value to others in a community of people here to bring the light.
Right. And what you value can change. I think you can find value in things that you didn't even realize were there.
Ooh.
You know, when you value two things your whole life, you're missing the point.
So I have a question for you in regards to letting go. And a reason why I'm asking you that is I truly believe that part of the grief and part of the growth and spiritual awakening is letting go. What would you say in regards to that?
I just read something that was so good. It was a prayer. Toward the end, it said, let go what needs to go and let come what needs to come. And I thought, wow. Some people might have thought, yeah, let go, let go, let come, let come. And I was like, wow.
Yes, right.
To me, that's a big concept.
It is a big concept, right? And that's why, because it really is ultimately in that is the process of surrender. It's the process of being willing to see what needs to go and being willing to be open to what is to come, even though you do not know what it may be. And I think that's the great mystery. And I'm just wondering how, because you had to let so much go after, a marriage, a career, all of these things, financially, it was a big adjustment. What would you say from that perspective of what's the process that you could share with people about how we can move into letting go? And why is it important?
I suppose I didn't have to make a decision to let go because things were taken.
Yes. Yes.
But at the same time, I had to keep going. On one level, not give up, but at the same time, not be incredibly bitter about everything.
I can imagine. I can imagine. How do we, or what would you recommend to people listening about how we can let go of the bitterness? If you're thinking about that in perspective, what would be some advice that we could let go of that? Because it seems like that's what really keeps us caught.
Is what do I really, really want? I mean, other than, for as a joke or as a 30-second thought, do I want so-and-so to have something terrible happen? You can think that for 2 seconds, but that's not going to really get you to the next big thing that you want for yourself. Where do I really want to be? What do I really, really want in life? That's where the focus has to be. And where the focus, not only where it has to be in terms of what's good or what's moral, but just plain what's going to make you feel good.
I love that. Yeah. And it really requires giving yourself permission, because I love that, because you said it's not only what's good and what's moral, but what's going to make you feel good, what's good for your soul. And sometimes that is requiring you to give yourself permission to move into that, for sure. So why a doctorate? I mean, it's such a huge undertaking, but what has drawn you to the doctorate and also writing a book? Because, we've had conversations over the years in regards to this, and this has just become more in the forefront, and you're just bringing people in to support you as you lean into this big desire for you. What is it? What is that desire for you both in the book and in the pursuit of your doctorate?
This comes from, what do I really, really want to do? Because that is something I always did want to do. And when I was 37, when I was younger, I was encouraged to do a doctorate, and I didn't. And then when I turned 37, I said, well, now it's too late. So I messed that up. And now, so I won't do it. After this, I thought of it, and it was like the wildest, stupidest thing I could ever dream up. And I thought, you know what? That's what I really, really want. And I ran it by a really good friend, and I ran it by my neurologist, who's a very famous, people from all over the world come in to study with him and everything. And I ran it by him, and he said, that would be great for your brain.
Wow.
That would be, what did he say? It would be fantastic for your brain.
Oh.
And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do it. I don't care how old I am.
Right. Yeah. And you thought you were too old at 37, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that funny when we look at that in perspective? So what is it that is driving you? It's something that you really, really want. Your heart calls for it. And what do you think on the other side of it, and through it, I should say, is going to light you up as far as what you're going to be bringing to the world?
Well, I love school. I mean, I honestly was that kid who loved sitting with piles of books doing homework. I just was that kid, and I'm still that kid. I love reading and writing. So of all the things I could do with this life that I somehow got back, this is what I want to do more than anything in the world. And writing a book is part of the degree, but it's also something that I very much want to do about the mystics.
I love that. So can you talk a little bit about that project?
It's about the mystics and dying and helping people who are dying, other ways that they can be helped to be less fearful. I took a class called A Good Death. It was about a good life. There was so much talk about whether it should be called a good life rather than a good death, because it's right up until you die, all the things that you can do in your life to make it so much better. But also this thing about what the mystics have to say is so wonderful. I mean, I wrote a research paper about this, and I was like, everything about this is fascinating. And I truly believe what these people have to say. I mean, they do have direct contact with God, and everything they had to say was so beautiful. Merton was one of them that I used.
Yes, love.
I really think that it could help someone who's dying and afraid of dying to learn all these things, and also practical things, certain types of meditation, and even some old-fashioned things. Like, I think our generation never did rosary or anything like that, you know. But when my father was dying, he said the rosary every single day. And when he was dying, he could no longer do it. It was just hanging on his bedpost. So I took it down one time and I was like, all right, I'll say the rosary for him. But I was embarrassed. I was like, what if someone hears me? And I was like, okay, Our Father, really quietly, you know.
Mother Mary fully.
The beads were so smooth. And so it felt so good in my hand. And so I started doing it. And I thought, this is something that should be made contemporary, because all these other cultures use beads, all these other religions use beads.
Well, it's textural. It's a beautiful ritual.
Right. So I thought, I think you should bring that back. And, you know, there are things that people can do when they feel sick and when they're dying that could help them feel better. And so I just think I'm developing a whole program for people.
It's so awesome. And the program that we were in, the spiritual direction program, there was aspects to it about a good death and being an end of life coach or a death doula. You know, people would hear that and they're like, oh my gosh, that's so depressing. Well, that's the culture where you and I don't feel that way. We're like, no, we need that. We need people to be journeying with us at the end and celebrating that process too. And you and I are very positive, life-affirming people. And right. I remember my grief counselor, who was a minister. She was a Protestant minister, but she was positivity like you. And she dealt a lot with suicide. And I was like, if she can bring light to dark places, it was mystical for me how committed she was to bring the light and how positive of a light person she was. And yes, she was in the space of military suicide. So she was an inspiration to me. And you think so much of the people that are there with death are just serious and, you know, it's somber and wear black. And I wore white to my son's memorial service. I wasn't going to wear black because it was like, I was here to celebrate the light of who he was. But this isn't how we're taught. This is like, I did it everything completely different because I knew what was right for me, but it made other people uncomfortable. So it's just bringing this more into the mainstream. And that's why I was so excited to interview you because of this. Thanks. Because it is someplace that we can bring the light in, even in our culture that doesn't believe it to be so. And I believe that this is a very important work that you're doing. I'm looking forward certainly to sharing it with the community. So what are the ways that the community can support you, Mary Elizabeth, in this process? Because it takes a village to do what you're doing for sure.
Well, thank you. I am going to an abbey, to a monastery this summer and living with the monks. You know, they do offices, it's called. They start at 3:40 in the morning. And they get up and they do these prayers and they do a mass and they work, monks do different things. Some of them make jams and jellies or they do farming and stuff like that. And then they eat, they have great food because they're farmers, and they make great food and they eat in silence. And then anyway, so I'm going to do some of what they do, but then they have a very good library. I'm going to use their library to be writing. That's the main reason I'm going to search and write, but I need help financially to go and do that. And also to get the academic credit for doing that.
Doing that, right. And where is the monastery?
I can't say.
Oh, you can't say, but that's so cool. I love that. I did that. I went to a Franciscan monastery in New Mexico, and I prayed with the priests, and it was a crazy, wild experience for me. I did that a couple summers ago, and because they had housing, so we could go there and stay, but then just be part of the program. And the priest was just kind of took me under his wing, and he was quite a storyteller. But it was a very powerful experience for me. I loved it. I loved the silence. I think people thought I was crazy, but I was like, no, this is awesome.
I love it. I know. I always say, oh, my idea of a good time is going on a silent retreat. And I always, when I'd go on an 8-day retreat, it seemed like the end would come too fast.
Oh, wow.
And I would always feel like, God, I'm right in the middle of something, and I have to leave. And I would go back to my regular life just fine, but I still would feel like I needed to go for a longer period of time. So I can go for a month and do a lot. I mean, imagine how much I can write.
And exactly. It's going to be incredible. Yeah. So I'll absolutely, for those of you who are listening that are wanting to support Mary Elizabeth, we sure would appreciate it. And we'll be sharing the links to that, and also ways that you can contact her. If you have any questions about all the amazing topics that we've talked about, if you're feeling challenged with your faith, if you're feeling as though you know someone that needs a conversation, end of life, that needs that support, Mary Elizabeth is, I would say she's exquisite. Because that's how she makes me feel, and her ability to be in the light. I've been in her light, both in person and certainly here. And I'm so grateful that I have a sister in this journey. I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And is there anything I usually say this, like if you had a billboard, or, what do you want people to know, Mary Elizabeth, if you could let someone know something, what would that be that you want them to know?
Overtly, I'm not religious, even though I sounded, especially in this conversation. Like I'm not a holy roller. I remember
not at all.
When I was in college. Do I have 2 more minutes to
you have it? No, tell the story, please.
I had a weekend in undergrad, but it had just been wild weekend and parties and everything. It had a big, gorgeous church. And I was walking home from somebody's apartment, and unplanned, I just walked straight into the church and walked right up front and sat down. And I mentally said, God, I know I'm not some holy roller, but I really would like to have a relationship with you. And all of a sudden it was loud. There was this like incredible energy that came and knocked me back in the pew. And I thought took out the whole back of the church. And I was like, oh my God, it was like, I guess that was a yes.
Wow.
That was the most loving, beautiful, powerful yes. And so I sat there when it stopped, and I slowly turned around, because I really did think that the whole back of the church had gotten blown off. And everything was fine. So I just slowly sat there and picked up my books and just trotted off back to my dorm. All that is to say, I don't feel overtly, I'm not a holy roller. And my family, my Irish Catholic family at this point is atheist, agnostic, Buddhist, you know, I think I'm the only liberal Catholic left. But it doesn't matter what you think and what you feel. There is something out there to help you.
We're not alone. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for your stories. I'm so grateful for you. Thanks to all the viewers and listeners. I appreciate you listening into this conversation. And neither of us, I would say, are holy rollers. We just choose to be in the light and to explore intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually the journey, and to be able to really fully be there with others. And I believe that's my obligation and my responsibility as a human being. And I believe that you share the same. Yeah. So thank you so much. I appreciate you. And thank you so much. I will see you again on Master Your Life with Kate McKay. And until next time, remember, there is so much more out there. You are not alone. And I see you in the light to the beautiful being that you are, and in the evolution of who you came here to be. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Master Your Life. If you enjoyed this episode, please like this and share it so that you can get notices for the next episode, releasing every week.